Welcome to the Brew Crew Review Podcast, the show by fans for fans of your Milwaukee Brewers. All right, welcome, Brewer fans, to the Brew Crew Review Podcast number 40. With me today, of course, our regular colleagues, Scott Bartell and Vince Travato. Hey, guys, how you doing?
Hey, Craig, doing great. Hey, is Chad Collins on the line, though? Chad? Did you talk, Scott or Craig, did you guys talk to Chad earlier? Is he coming on tonight?
No.
He's an MPS school teacher, and I know that I think it's the full 14 days before classes start. He goes on like I think he calls it a 2-week bender. I don't know what that means exactly, but it basically means he's unavailable.
Okay.
So.
Yeah.
Maybe once his job starts again, he'll have more flexibility in the schedule.
Yeah, I think he kind of calms down a little bit.
I think he said something about like taking too much Ambien or something, and that was really what was throwing him all off. I thought I saw that in an interview with him lately. I don't know.
Well, America's youth is in good hands. That's what we know. So
better sell my stock at Chad pretty quick here. Anyway, all right, well, Milwaukee Brewers continuing on here in their playoff push as we move forward. I think one thing we'll start by talking about is the fact that this year's trade deadline, Stearns did not trade any of what I consider our current blue chip prospects, and that would obviously Corbin Burns, Freddie Peralta, and Keston Hira, which I think most Brewer fans were happy about. And he also managed to hang on to a couple of what I call future blue chip prospects. And again, all this can change any dollar dime, but Corey Ray has bounced back and had a pretty awesome season in the minor leagues after really disappointing his first 2 years in our system. I think he's definitely someone, stock is way up. And then Tristan Lutz also started off a little bit slow, but he's having a good season. He's only 19 years old, so I really expect him to be a future corner outfielder for the Brewers if not traded. And then another guy, Zach Braun, having a fine season in the minor leagues as well, right-handed pitcher. So,
and Craig, on that note, Braun, it sounds like is going to be able to come back from his injury. He had an ankle injury here in the last couple of weeks, but it sounds like he's going to come back for the final push in the playoffs in the minor league. So it's good to see that he's going to get back on the field this year. I think that it's really frustrating and tough for guys who end their season on an injury. I think there's a real mental component of that where it's awesome when a guy can get back on the field before the season is over. So that's good news today out of the Brewers minor league system.
And also on a note that our 2018 first-round draft pick, shortstop out of high school, Bryce Trang, is having pretty awesome debut season with the Brewers Rookie League affiliate. I think he's doing well over 300. And I'm really, after seeing him, tear up as an 18-year-old, the minor leagues coming into it like that, I really have high hopes for his hit tool. And I know that people have been described him or, scouts do comparison and say that he'd be like a shortstop version of Christian Yelich, which as a Brewer fan, you got to be pretty excited about. A little bit unsure if he'll have quite the power that Yelich has, but I do think he could hit over 300 in the big leagues. But all of this is speculative, of course. But anyway, so all in all, I think some of the prospects that we did trade, like Brett Maverick Phillips, I think we're expendable, and we've touched on this or whatever. Obviously, we wish them all well, but now that they're not in the Brewer system anymore, we just don't want them doing well against us. So that's pretty much where that leaves off. And most of our trades with American League teams, so hopefully we don't have to worry about that as we made a trade for sure with the White Sox, Royals with Moustakas, and of course the Orioles with Scope. So I guess Stearns did a pretty good job with that. So the other thing I want to talk about,
really think out of that group. that group that we gave up, Cheese and Phillips, really would be the guys that I'd be most concerned we go on to really productive big league careers. I'm not as worried about Cody Medeiros or Jorge Lopez at this point. And I think that Phillips is going to be a decent guy to have come off your bench or be a fourth outfielder, maybe even start for a team like the Royals for a couple of seasons and great defensively. But I don't think the Brewers gave up a ton this deadline. We'll see. But
one of the guys, I hate to say this, that I was kind of completely done with as a Brewer fan, it's Jorge Lopez. I mean, we drafted him, when he was very young out of Puerto Rico, and he had some hopes to have some nice seasons in the minor leagues, but he really, as he progressed up the ladder and got close to the majors, he really kind of showed his true colors. I don't think he's a quality major league starting pitcher, at least. And the Royals seem to be really, seeing Dayton Moore seem kind of enamored with him. And in fact, I think they call him up to make some starts recently, even, which I was kind of surprised about.
Yeah, just yesterday or 2 days ago. Yeah.
Yeah, so I obviously wish him well, but I did not lose any sleep over losing him either. So, I mean, again, I think Stearns did a pretty good job of, doing his best to improve the team and not giving up too much of our really good, minor league chips going forward. So that really leaves us well stocked going into the offseason and then next year. And that brings up an interesting point, because I know that there are a lot of Brewer fans that are frustrated, like myself, who have waited all these years and years. I mean, the Brewers have been a franchise now for 48 years, and we've sniffed the playoffs just a handful of times over that 48 season. And it can get very frustrating when you seem like you're so close to playoffs like we were last year, losing out by one game and putting ourselves in a position to potentially do that or hopefully make it this year. But it gets really frustrating when you want teams to, quote-unquote, go for it when they're starting to have the opportunity to do it. Now, I think in order for this to work, the stars have to be lined up correctly. And I liked how Melvin went about it. And he waited until we had a really good roster, and then he made a trade for CC in 2008. He made a trade for Greinke in 2011. And it gave us an opportunity with a top rotation starter to not only get to the playoffs, but potentially go deep in the playoffs. And I liked his strategy as a GM. Now, people are saying that Stearns has more of a long-term outlook, and he's just trying to get the most talent in the organization as he possibly can, and he's not going to make those super bold moves necessarily and, quote-unquote, go for it, because that would involve giving up too much of our talent in order to get, a short-term satisfaction. So a lot of Brewer fans are saying that he's taking more of a long-term approach and that he may never do those type of moves, even if we feel like this is finally our team, not this year, but, say in the next 2 years, we finally have all the stars aligned and we're leading the division or something. He might still not, trade in all of our trade steps and just go for it so that the Brewers could possibly make it to or win a World Series one time. Instead, he wants them to be competitive on a year in and year out basis and give us multiple opportunities to go deep in the playoffs. Obviously, there's a couple different ways to go about it. As a small market team, I have my concerns about whether or not one or two of those philosophies are going to work or not. But I thought we could have like an open discussion on if as a Brewer fan, if you had your brothers, would you rather them be competitive every year, but not a guarantee to go to the World Series for like the next, let's say, 6 years, or so that's option number A, or would you rather have option number B, the Brewers just make it to, deep in the playoffs one time in the next 6 years, but it involves us winning the World Series? So, Scott, why don't you start us off on your thoughts on those options?
I mean, if there's 100% guarantee that we win a World Series, that's the option I'm taking no matter what. However, as we know in baseball, there are no guarantees. So if we're not guaranteed to win a World Series, then I guess I would just prefer this team to be good year in and year out and at least have a shot every year. I don't want to compare this to basketball because it's different, but the Bucks make the playoffs every year. They have no chance of winning a championship like the last few years that they've made the playoffs. And, baseball's a little different. You can get in and, you never know what'll happen. So that's my answer, I guess.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Those two sports are so different. I mean, there's so many teams. Sometimes the NBA is a joke to me in a lot of ways, but in the number one way is that how many teams that make the playoffs are, ridiculous. I mean, if you're a number 6, 7, or 8 seed in either conference, you're not going deep in the playoffs, period. In fact, if you're like anywhere from a 4 to an 8 seed, you're probably just there for, you're going to be ousted. So, and baseball is completely the opposite of that. I mean, most of our youth was spent with only 4 teams making the baseball playoffs, and now we have a total of, let's see, 10 total teams making the playoffs. So it's quite the improvement. I think Celia, as commissioner, made the product, and it makes you excited. But you're right; it's totally different. Making the playoffs in baseball is way more huge, and obviously the Brewers know that better than anyone.
Well, just to chime in on this, so since 2013, a different team has won the World Series every year. I guess just to point that out, and which is the longest streak right now in any of the 4 major professional sports in the United States. So that being said, I point to that because I think that just shows that if you do have a competitive team, you're going to be able to get in. If you're able to get into the playoffs, I really think that you do have a chance to win the World Series. Like you guys were just pointing out, it's not basketball where you know which teams are going to be in the finals pretty much on day 1 of the season. So I don't think that baseball is the same way anymore. And I think that you've got a chance with a competitive team to win the World Series. And so I like Stearns' approach. We should also point out that Melvin's approach is exciting for fans and it can pay some dividends, but we didn't win any World Series with Doug Melvin either. And we did make some big splashy moves. And there were also a number of years where we kept ourselves, quote unquote, in it by making big moves. And then those moves seem to hamper us as a franchise for a few years. And I'll just look at Kyle Loesch and Matt Garza as examples of that. So I think that building a team from the ground up with Stearns' approach, having guys that are quality guys in the system who are available to play in the big leagues or available via trade is a good thing overall. And that with the current playoff format, a team like the Brewers should strive to be competitive every single season with the chance to go into the playoffs and a chance to make a World Series and a chance to win the World Series than have, say our windows like we had in the past where we knew in 2011 and 2012 it was kind of a window. But after that, we were bad for several seasons. And in fact, we're still in that end of that rebuilding cycle now. And I think that that's what we have to avoid as a franchise going forward. We can't afford really to have those just long droughts of any sort of contention or playoff expectation. So I think that that's Stearns' approach. And my last point on this is I think that we don't really know if Stearns would pull the trigger on a big deadline trade, so to speak, with the Brewers having a team that was built for the playoffs and World Series yet, because this may not be the year. I mean, I think that we've on this podcast talked about at the beginning of this year in April that the Brewers were not going to make the playoffs this year. I don't think anybody really was thinking that the Brewers are a World Series contender this year. So for Stearns to go out and get, empty out the system for guys that were not going to be difference makers, I don't necessarily think was a smart strategy. So I don't blame him for not doing that. And I think that it's great that we've overachieved a bit in our couple seasons under Stearns' helm. I don't think that we've seen yet what Stearns would do at the deadline with a team like the 2011 Brewers that were really primed to make a run for the World Series yet.
And that's a good language you use, primed to make a run. And that's, I think, Scott started off by saying, well, if we're guaranteed to go to the World Series, I want that. And I agree with him 100% on that. And I prefer that method of when we're primed to go deep in the playoffs like we were in 2011, to make a Super Bowl move, to give us a better shot to not only, to get to the World Series and obviously to get there, you can win it. So that to me is, and a good example of this would be last year. Now, if you look at the Houston Astros, who had never won a World Series before last year, they were going, late in the season, they had the best team in baseball, almost hands down. They had tons of young talent. Obviously, they had so much talent on their farm that just like kind of the Brewers are starting to build up, that they could afford to make a big splashy move or whatnot. But in my opinion, they went out and got Justin Verlander. Now, they very well could have won the World Series without Justin Verlander. They were already at that point were guaranteed to make the playoffs. I think when they acquired Verlander, they were basically winning the division by quite a bit. And that move to get Verlander was when they were quote unquote primed to make a run. They knew they were going to be in the playoffs. They wanted to go deep in the playoffs and not only get the World Series but to win it. And that's exactly what happened. And as the Brewer fans unfortunately know too much, that doesn't always work out. It almost worked out with us in 2018 with CC. It got us to the playoffs because of that move. And in 2011, the Greinke move, obviously we gave quite a lot of talent, including a young Lorenzo Cain in that deal. But it did get us semi-deep in the playoffs. It didn't get us to the World Series, but it got us very close, within sniffing distance. And unfortunately, I thought that was a really good move at the time because the Brewers were quote-unquote primed to go deep in the playoffs. And they were going to be losing a guy like Prince Fielder and other guys. I think Greinke was only under control one more year. So, you had to, I guess that's kind of the question is rather than not make that move when we're quote unquote primed to go deep in the playoffs, but rather to hold off and just continue building talent. What do you prefer? Going for it when you're primed to, or just continuing to build the talent and just, not exactly make such a bold move.
But a team like the Astros did both, Craig. They built up talent for years, and they were semi-decent prior to last year, and they had a chance to get guys maybe at the deadline in some of those years prior to 2017, and they didn't necessarily do it because they wanted to keep some of that talent to reserve it for a guy like Verlander when the time came. And I think that that's kind of the Stearns approach coming from that organization. It would make a lot of sense. To get back to the Greinke point, the Brewers didn't trade for Greinke at the deadline in 2010, despite the fact that we had a team that on paper at least said that, well, maybe we're in it this year. I think that we waited until the offseason prior to 2011 so that we would have him at a full year when the Royals were ready to sell him. So I think it's all dependent on who's available at any given time. I think that we've heard numerous reports on MLB trade rumors and from reputable beat writers, around the country that, Stearns was kicking the tires on a lot of guys, but that doesn't mean that it was the right time to pull the trigger on a lot of guys too. So I think that the Brewers are going to make some splashy moves this offseason, that no matter what happens, in the next 6-7 weeks of this season and the playoffs or potential playoffs. But I do think that you can point out to examples of teams being able to do both, and that's really where the Brewers want to be. So I don't think this is really an either-or choice at all. I think it's really dependent on who's available at any given time, as much as it is the organization itself.
Well, and what's really kind of, I guess, I was really just kind of looking at this, and I'm like, okay, we've got 5 All-Stars. We've never had that before, right? And, I mean, we've made the playoffs, 3 times in, basically 50 years? Man, I mean, I would love to make the playoffs every other year, even if I wasn't sure that we were going to, quote, go for it. I mean, that would be great. I mean, just think about it. In that decade, we'd be better than the last 50 years. But having said that, I just don't think that this team – what is this team good at? Their bullpen, is very good. But other than that, there's nothing that this team is particularly good at in any way. And so as much as I want us to, go for it when we're primed and ready, we're not ready. So that's –
I 100% agree with you, Scott. And I didn't bring up this question on this podcast because I am disappointed. I thought the Brewers were, quote-unquote, primed to make a deep run in the playoffs this year, and then we missed the opportunity. Absolutely not. I'm saying I think that time will come in the next couple of years, or could be. And whether or not, I think Vince has a valid point that like the Astros, and of course Stearns came from the Astros, they stockpiled the minor league talent to the point of, their 40-man was more full than ours was this year. They stockpiled the talent, and before they were like, okay, not only are we running away with the division, but we also have a stacked minor leagues right now. So let's go ahead and turn around and use that, get a Justin Verlander, and win this thing. And obviously I agreed with that philosophy. And I'm not saying Stearns is not showing that he's going to do it. I feel that he probably will. And we weren't quote unquote primed to do it this year. I think that the minor tweaking moves he made this year were the right thing to do. I just don't think he made the right small minor tweaking moves this year. Obviously, if he could have made a big splash and got us a controllable guy like, Syndergaard or DeGrom or something like that, you don't pass up on that opportunity, just like he didn't pass up the opportunity to get Yelich. And that's obviously been huge for this team.
Yeah, and I was going to say, too, that's exactly it. And we've talked about it at length before, but I just think that there were none of the guys that Stearns could see being in a Brewers uniform beyond this year that were available and worth the price. So I think that's why you didn't see more moves at the deadline for starting pitching from the Brewers. And I think there's no question that all of us would say yes to getting DeGrom or Syndergaard for pretty much whatever it would take from the system, because those are guys that are going to be here for the next 2-3 seasons, maybe longer if we could sign them to an extension. So I think that those moves would have been different. I don't think that getting a rental for a couple months where the Brewers in the position that they're in now would have necessarily been the right move. And, even looking back at 2011, we didn't make any moves at the deadline, I don't believe, except for Jerry Hairston Jr. The moves that Melvin made for that season were done prior to the season. So that was the Zach Greinke move and the Nigel Morgan move. And I think that going into next season, I'd be surprised if the Brewers didn't make some bigger moves, just like we did this year with Cain and Yelich coming to the Brewers, in the offseason prior to the start of the season.
Yeah. No. One other factor in all this, in this question, is the fact that the question is obviously different than if you ask it to a GM or fans of a big market team as opposed to a small market team like the Brewers. For example, if you're the Cubs and they built up a stock load of young, controllable, minor league talent too before they started to then sign big name free agents to long-term contracts. And as a big market team, you have that opportunity to sign those contracts. And if some of those contracts blow up in your face, like hopefully you Darvish, you can recover from that as a big market team. Whereas if the Brewers make a mistake, just throwing out some examples, but had they said, you know what, we're going to sign CeCe to a long-term deal like the Yankees did, or we're going to sign Prince Phillies to a ridiculous contract like the Tigers did. Of course, the Brewer fans love both those guys, but if we had done any of those either of those long-term contracts, we would have been crippled as a franchise. And so as a small market team, we can't even afford to do that. So as disappointing as it was for us not to get DeGrom or Syndergaard or anyone like that, this trade deadline, or even a Stroman, I'm looking at, trying to say, next year's free agent class is going to be awesome. And even on the pitching side, some Brewer fans could argue, and I wouldn't disagree with them, that it's maybe even too risky to sign one of those pitchers. Like guys like Dallas Keuchel is not having a very good year. He's a free agent, but are you really going to risk giving him a 5-year deal? Or some guy who I really like is Patrick Corbin of the Diamondbacks having a breakout year. He could probably be had for a little bit cheaper, but he's still going to probably require a minimum of a 4-year contract, and that's pretty risky. So I guess the point I'm making is the way that Melvin and those 2 seasons as examples acquired aces for just the 1 year, half season for CC, or the 1 year for Greinke, it was – well, actually, I think Greinke was actually under control for 2 years, and we flipped him after we owned him for 1 year and then flipped him over to the Angels. Got
year and a half,
right? Yeah.
Yep.
So
we got Segura and a couple other guys.
Still, it was a small window, and I kind of agree with that same philosophy going forward. It's kind of just like the Astros of Verlander last year. They only had, he was not under contract for too much longer. And so they were able to take on that risk of acquiring someone, using the process for like a short-term window. And so I kind of agree with Stearns' whole philosophy is building up all his talent, and then using Vince's terminology earlier in this podcast, when you're primed to go for it, I think that a move like that needs to be made. But like Vince pointed out, stars still have the line. That guy that can put you over the top, like a CC, like a Verlander, still has to be available via trade. And not only that, but you have to have the right chips in place to be the highest bidder to get them. So, I mean, it's such a complicated thing, but overall, my question. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead, Craig.
I was just going to say, just to kind of give my answer to the question that proposed at the beginning of the podcast, 100%, I want to, when the stars are aligned and we're primed to go deep in the playoffs, I want us to make that bold move to get us into the World Series so that we have an opportunity to win it, even if it sacrifices a couple of years of contending.
Yeah, I don't know that it's an A or B choice, though. I mean, that's the big difference I see with this. I don't know that it's necessarily that way anymore. I think that I think that if the Brewers are able to stockpile guys in their system like the Astros did, that then you can keep contending for quite a while and continue that cycle even while trading some prospects for that big name, so to speak, at the deadline some year. But yeah, absolutely. Should we be willing to trade prospects for a star player when the time is right? Then yeah, absolutely. I mean, no question about it. But I do think that if you're a small market, you do have to be a little smart and try to find guys that are either going to be here for more than just a half season, or you're trading guys that aren't necessarily going to be viewed as valuable. And going back to that CC trade, really the only guy that made any difference at the big league level that we gave up was Mickey Brantley. Now, I don't know if that's because there was some good scouting in the Brewers organization that sort of told them that the guys that the Indians wanted weren't going to be as valuable going forward, but whatever it was, it seemed to work in that one instance. But I think the trend would be more with a team like the Brewers would be more the Greinke example, where you have a shot for 2 seasons with him in your uniform. And if it didn't work out like it didn't for the Brewers in 2012, then you trade him at the deadline at that point, and then you can kind of restock a little bit that way and get back some of what you gave up. And even going back a lot further, guys like Don Sutton, who the Brewers acquired at the deadline in '82, he was here for another few seasons after that. So I think that the small market team like the Brewers has to be looking at that option first, and then a guy like CC second, probably. But again, depending on the year and depending on the prospects involved.
You know what else actually really scares me? Like I was thinking like, oh yeah, hopefully we could just be like the Astros, and I mean they were so bad for so long, but they did a pretty good job of hitting on their draft picks, and they were able to not completely sell out, completely deplete their farm system and still be able to get a guy like Verlander and still win a World Series. I mean, that's the dream scenario. But having said that, like I looked at it, like right now, do you know that we're like ranked 19th for our farm system? That's not what I expected at all. Like for some reason, I thought we were still going to be like a top 10 system, but clearly that's not the case. And part of that is due to us promoting some guys, but still, I mean, having said that, I mean, man, that's lower than I want for a small market, because we have to start hitting on our draft picks, and we have to start building, that kind of talent from within if we're ever going to be competitive. Simple as that.
Yeah, the Brewers missed on their drafts for a number of seasons, unfortunately. So that's one problem. I think, I mean that's obviously the biggest problem. We'll see what happens now under the Stearns leadership after a few years there, to see if that system can kind of resuscitate itself a bit. But and I'm far from being a prospect hoarder or a prospect hugger, or valuing prospects over big league ball players, because that's probably the opposite of how I feel. But I just think the Brewers need to be smart given our financial situation, and when we make those bigger deals.
I really love Scott's point about the fact that our minor league system isn't currently like one of the most top-rated ones. Yeah, we have some nice blue chippers for the top, which is good, and I feel like we've got some depth, but we don't have those franchise blue chippers like a Ryan Braun or a Prince Fielder, or even, well, I guess you can. To me, I would compare level of prospect-wise Hero to maybe Weeks. And so there's obviously some risk involved there. He's not going to be a sure thing. Yeah, he hit well in college and had a good minor league track record, but I don't think Hero has a ceiling like Braun or Fielder, in my opinion, not even close. So, again, you're looking – if you look back, if you were going to the contention back in 2005 and our best prospect is only Ricky Weeks, I mean, you have to temper your expectations a little bit. I mean, when you're realistically looking at who these guys are going to become. And so that's what scares me the most. Is I don't really see currently in our system, and that's why we are ranked 19th, I don't see franchise players. And the reason why the Astros were able to do such a phenomenal job of building what's probably going to be a juggernaut of a team for years to come here is the fact that they bottomed out for several years and got top 5 draft picks that they actually hit on, like George Springer, like, Alex Bregman and all that. And so the Brewers didn't really have an opportunity to bottom out long enough. And that's why, as much as exciting as it was for us to kind of end our rebuild a little bit earlier, I think there was some danger in that. And the fact that, we probably aren't as stocked in the minor leagues as well as we need to be. And it's going to be hard to do that going forward when we're not sellers anymore.
Yeah, I mean, but the Brewers have saved a ton of money in the last few seasons, it seems like. So if we had holes to fill, I could see the Brewers investing in free agents or picking up guys via trade that are signed to bigger contracts if need be. I don't think that we're as hamstrung financially as maybe we have been in the past. So I think that that's a good thing for the Brewers going forward. I don't know that Hira's ceiling is quite as low as what you're saying, but I do agree with the overall premise that our system is overall pretty weak. I mean, we don't have much depth that's going to be all-star caliber depth at least. And I am concerned a little bit about that. I think it's all situational. It depends on who's available at any given moment, so I don't think that Stern saw the right matchups this year for pitching. And I don't think that he should have spent the prospects that we do have on, 3 or 4 starters. We have a ton of those types of guys. So I think that, again, you go into the offseason with the plan. If we're planning on contending next year, I think the Brewers go out and get a top of the rotation guy and deal from our prospect depth, and we'll deal with that as time moves forward with hopefully better drafts.
Yeah, so I don't really know if we've fully answered the question. I know Scott said go for it, win a World Series. I was kind of like, when the time is prime, go for it, or at least give yourself the best chance. I think Vince's overall answer is kind of in the same vein, but more to make sure that we're making the playoffs many, many years so that we can get deep, at least one of those. I'm also a believer in that you kind of take these things in steps. And I really thought the Brewers beginning to contend last year was one step. Them acquiring Yelich and in this offseason really was an exciting next step, which I thought would have led to an improved club, and we would have at least made the playoffs with the expectation of getting ousted at some point before the World Series this year. And let's hope that still happens, I guess, as the season winds down.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely, I think, a better club than last year, certainly with those two guys at the top of our lineup. I think that if Nelson was, healthy and in the starting rotation, you'd see a few more wins than we currently have. But, overall, the team has a lot of bright spots at the big league level right now. And I think that those steps are definitely taking place to your point, Craig. So we'll see. I think that, again, this offseason we'll definitely be getting a top of the rotation arm. And I think that it'll be really interesting to see what else we do. But I think the catching and the catcher's position and probably top of the rotation guys, maybe with another bullpen addition or two, are going to be sort of the key focal points of the offseason.
Yep, and that point with Cain and Yelich being controlled by the Brewers for the next 4 years beyond this season, I think that really gives Brewer fans the window that this current iteration of a small market Brewers, that's their window. And I'd say sometime before the end of that window, the Brewers have to be in position to be quote-unquote prime to go deep in a pro playoff run. And I'm hoping Stearns, and I have faith that he has the coins and they're the star of the line, that we will go make a bold move to do such at the time. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Sorry, Scotty, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm a little worried, though, about the back end of that contract with Cain, though. I mean, you're talking about his year, like when he's age 36 season by the time all is said and done. And like we kind of watched this year, Ryan Braun not quite fall off a cliff offensively, but certainly not being the Braun that he once was. And, obviously, you expect that sort of, I guess they slowly get worse as they get older, and that's just the way life is. But I'm a little worried about what Cain's going to be like. I just hope that he can withstand, the little injuries that he seems to get, but he seems to be able to play through them most of the time. So hopefully he'll be able to be good, all the way through.
One thing with that, though, Scott, too, is that if we sign Lorenzo Cain to a contract where we know that he's not necessarily going to be the Lorenzo Cain of today in 5 years, 4 years from now, I think that's okay. I think the Brewers had some financial flexibility this past offseason and wanted to use it for a guy like Cain because he's going to be good for this season. And I think for the next 3 years, honestly, he's still going to be really good. And if he is going forward going to be either a bench guy or a mentor to a guy like Corey Ray, I'm okay with that role for him for his last year or two of his contract. Even though he's making big dollars, a guy like Ray then will not. So you've got essentially that position covered by one of those two guys and, all the other intangibles that a guy like Cain can bring to the team. And who knows how he'll age. But I have confidence that Cain, with his conditioning, he's going to be just fine for at least the next few seasons.
Yeah, I totally 100% agree with Vince on this one, and I understand Scott's concerns and the risk of the back of that contract. Definitely something to think about. But the bottom line, Cain, as his individual players, whereas it for the fact that he can A, hit leadoff, B, play defense, and C, and maybe this should have been A, but his intangibles are through the roof, and I'm totally convinced of that. And I think it was a great signing. So.
Yeah, and he's a team leader for sure right now, in my opinion. So I think that does carry some weight, and to have that guy in your clubhouse, even 4 seasons from now, if the Brewers are in contention in 4 years, and it's Cain who's coming off the bench late in the game, I've got a lot of faith in a guy like that, and his leadership qualities aren't going away, and that doesn't matter what age you are for those. And I think that those are huge.
Absolutely. So Scott, how are we doing on time? I think we might have to wrap this one up.
I think we're okay for now, I guess.
Did we hear any projections for the next few weeks from or for the next few seasons, I should say, or to answer this question from our anonymous source? So I don't want to say his name, but Tom Carter.
Wait.
Yeah, he actually said his name.
And then, it's fine. It's
yeah. Well, okay. We'll call
just
him
this
Tom
one. Just this one.
Carter.
Will slip up.
Okay.
It'll be fine.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, Tom Carter, but
what can you do? But with that being said, I'm still very hopeful that the Brewers can right the ship, and there should be hopefully exciting September, and that we can stay right there in contention and win some really meaningful games down the stretch. With our lights out bullpen and our awesome lineup. So let's hope for the best.
That's all you can do.
Sounds good, guys. Well, hopefully we're still talking meaningful baseball a month from now, and it'd be really nice to win some of these games in division. I think that's going to be the key for us, as we talked about on our last podcast. Is these in division games we can really make up or lose a lot of ground very quickly. So, we saw what a bad week for the Brewers did for a team like the Cubs right before the All-Star break, and maybe there'll be a bad week for the Cubs here as the Brewers continue on, hopefully playing better baseball in September, and the Cubs are not going to be as rested here in the last 5 weeks of the year as they were during the first half with all their off days. So hopefully the Brewers can take advantage. That'd be great and slip into the playoffs. And again, even though this isn't quote unquote our year, we still have a ability to do anything if we can squeak into the playoffs. You never know.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean, looking ahead, I think we have in September alone we have 9 games against the Cubs and the Cardinals. Fortunately, 6 of them are on the road. My feeling is we need to win 6 of those 9 games, and I feel like we'll be playoff bound. So those are huge key games. And to make up for this week, I think we need to do that as a team, and I'm really hopeful that we will.
Let's hope so. All right. I guess that's pretty much it. Hey, guys?
Yeah, guys. Well, remember to stay classy, everybody, and go Brewers.
All right. Stay classy, guys. Go Brewers.
All right. Go Brewers.
Come on,